The unanimous decision of this court is that the terms woman and sex in the Equality Act 2010 refer to a biological woman and biological sex.
In a landmark case, Britain's highest court defining what a woman is.
But this year, lawmakers have passed 3 bills targeting transgender teens, and there's been no real pushback.
The transgender movement is an introductory phase to get you to strip yourself of your humanity to mesh with machines.
I've been obstructed from entering into my workplace where I teach and have taught for the past 7 years. Of course, it's all arising out of the fact that I wouldn't accept transgenderism and call a young boy they.
A teacher at the school told him to leave his gayism outside of the school's premises.
Government is to ban the promotion of homosexuality in schools.
I obviously don't want children taught that the gay and lesbian lifestyle is natural or normal. It is not.
It's my overriding concern is with the promotion of positive images of homosexuality in the schools from primary school right through, and that is what's causing many parents real concern and offence.
The Lobbyists didn't know that it was a crime for a white person to marry a Negro in Virginia. They found out the hard way.
Do you think women should be banned from wearing trousers?
Yes.
What, by law?
They used to be for thousands of years. Do you know that until 300 years ago, a woman wearing trousers would be executed?
Every generation thinks their moral panic is brand new. It never is. And once you learn the pattern, you can never unsee it.
And somebody think of the children.
Hi, I'm Jessica Kellgren-Fozard, and if you're new here, welcome. On this channel, I explore the fascinating intersections of queer history, disability, feminism, culture, and social change. As a disabled lesbian who also happens to be a mother, I am particularly interested in the stories that get left out of the history books. The people who challenged expectations, expanded rights, and made the world a little fairer for those who came after them. So make yourself comfortable, consider subscribing, and let's dive into how the UK's recent profound rollback of trans rights and legal protections is sparking intense national debate.
Is it a debate, though?
So let's talk, because understanding where these ideas come from is often the first step to understanding where they might take us next. Why anti-trans arguments feel so familiar. History is rarely identical, but it is often very familiar. Once you start studying queer history, really studying, you begin to notice patterns. And one of the biggest patterns is this. Every generation believes their panic is brand new, but it's almost never new. Sure, the target changes and the language updates slightly. The fonts definitely get uglier. I mean, Facebook is murdering graphic design daily, but fundamentally, the script stays remarkably consistent.
Protect children, protect women, think of the family. It's a social contagion. They're confusing young people. It's dangerous.
What's that?
Books. Have you seen them? So many awful ideas. They're leading the young people astray.
I have some bad news for you. If some of those phrases sound familiar to you, that's because they're being used right now about trans people. But they're also used about gay people, lesbians and disabled people, interracial couples, suffragettes, even women wearing trousers.
Can't remember, I'm afraid.
Which sounds ridiculous now, because obviously civilization did survive seeing the shape of women's legs.
Barely. It was a close one.
But moral panics always sound reasonable to the people inside them. That's where they were. And there is an important reason to talk about this during Pride Month specifically, because queer history is not just horror, and it's not just a celebration, obviously. There is a large degree of pattern recognition. It's understanding the specific fear surrounding queer people today did not appear out of nowhere, and it also won't last forever. Every generation believes their moral panic is permanent, but history suggests otherwise.
So happy Pride Month. Let's rejoice that we're still here.
Happy Pride Month indeed! And whilst we are still here discussing the importance of queer history, you might be thinking, but Jessica, I've watched every queer TV show and film available in my country and it is Pride Month. I need more queer content. You need Surfshark VPN, the sponsor of today's video, so you can access queer content that isn't available in your country, like What It Feels Like for a Girl. Only on BBC iPlayer. Highly recommend this show. So the star actor, Ellis Howe's performance is with over 4,500 servers in 140 locations, Surfshark VPN is a clever tool that protects your internet connection so you can browse securely from pretty much anywhere. I will not be forced to miss one episode of RuPaul's Drag Race UK vs. the World when travelling, and luckily I don't have to. Surfshark also shields you from hackers, trackers, or snoopers when you're using public Wi-Fi, so getting protection and security with your extra content. Yes, a VPN encrypts your connection so you stay protected even when you're out and about watching my queer history videos, Hello You, and The Train. Surfshark's content web blocker also stop unwanted pop-ups of any sort. No, don't do that. Don't let someone try and steal your rights and personal information. So, when you're educating grandma about why we don't use certain words to describe gay men anymore, you're not going to have any untoward pop-ups that might distract her. Try Surfshark now by heading to surfshark.com/Jessica and use code Jessica at checkout to get 4 extra months of Surfshark VPN for free. Or, if it's easier, you can just scan the QR code on screen right here. You have to love a QR code. The language of fear. One of the clearest examples of this in Britain was Section 28. Section 28 was a law introduced in the UK from 1988 that prohibited local authorities from promoting homosexuality.
What does promoting mean? How do I go about doing that? Is there a sign-up sheet?
Yes, the wording was intentionally vague, and importantly so, because vague laws are incredibly useful if your actual goal is just fear. Teachers became terrified of acknowledging queer existence at all. Books disappeared from schools, support systems vanished, young queer people were left isolated because adults feared losing their jobs. And justification?
Protecting children.
Always the children. Always. Because protecting children is one of the most emotionally powerful political arguments imaginable. If you can convince the public that a minority group is somehow a threat to children, a rational discussion just becomes almost impossible. And this is where the historical echo becomes difficult to ignore. Because if you place anti-gay rhetoric from the 1980s beside anti-trans rhetoric from now, the similarities are startling. Not, like metaphorically startling. Literally startling.
Effective a couple weeks ago, I have resigned from my position. I'm leaving because I feel the board is more interested in removing pride flags and banning literature than they are in protecting us educators. I'm leaving because I don't feel that I can adequately provide a safe environment for my students anymore. I'm leaving because I refuse to work for an organization that sees supporting kids for who they are as indoctrination.
Really thought you'd have sorted this out by now. Disappointing.
Oh, I'm so sorry, your bright goddessness.
Well, we can't allow these people to recruit our youth. That's what Sunday school is for.
Depressingly, many of these arguments rely on the idea that queer people are somehow contagious.
We're just more powerful than the straights. 0 queer children have been sucked into their ideology long term.
I think you may be simplifying things a little there. Conversion therapy is awful and still currently legal in the UK. Also, there are a host of cultural and societal factors that mean queer people may...
You know what I mean, buzzkill. And yes, I have yet to actually turn a straight to our side. Unfortunately.
Yes, but of course the idea that identity can spread through exposure, that seeing queer people, learning queer history, or simply knowing that queer people exist might somehow turn someone queer, does remain popular. If we're talking about queerphobic rhetoric, then we really need to step back to one of the most famous anti-LGBTQ+ bigots in history, Anita Bryant. In 1969, the Stonewall riots forced gay rights into national consciousness. The first pride parades were held in the summer of 1970, and in 1973, the American Psychiatric Association declassified homosexuality as a mental health disorder.
But only after gay activists interrupted their conference shouting, "Gay conversion therapy is torture," so...
True, let's not give them too many props. Okay. On January 18th, 1977, Dade County, Florida approved a law that added the phrase affectional or sexual preference to its non-discrimination ordinance, effectively banning housing and employment discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation. Yay! But this was a step too far for one pop singer, bigot, beauty queen, homophobe, and spokeswoman for the Florida Citrus Commission.
Sounds like a lot. Didn't she have hobbies?
Anita Bryant was actually from Oklahoma. That's probably not... You didn't need that information, but there we go. But when she heard her pastor speaking about the non-discrimination ordinance, she felt a divine disturbance in her heart.
It's very plain in many, many scriptures, in the Old Testament as well as the New, that God calls it an abomination.
That's a bit much. I don't know that abomination is the right word.
Oh. Also, exactly which translation are we talking about?
Anita wrote to the county commissioners, stressing that as the mother of 4 children, she had never condoned nor taught them discrimination against anyone. But removing discrimination against gay people would actually be discrimination against her as a citizen and infringing upon her rights as a mother to teach her children God's moral code of discrimination as stated in the Holy Scriptures. How dare they? My twins don't drink orange juice because I'm married to a dentist, and they are very sunny people who don't discriminate against anyone. So there, Anita.
Do babies generally discriminate against people?
That's not the point. When the amendment passed, Anita created a campaign for its repeal, the Save Our Children Coalition, again children, which sponsored provocative TV ads implying that gay people are degenerates who ruin communities and seduce children, so we really, really don't want them in our neighbourhood.
Let's pray for him right now. Anita, let's pray.
Down the garbage you spout.
Oh, but Pittacus and Alcaeus do such a good job with the flower arrangements for the front of the temple. How they make them look so good, I'll never know. That is quite a never mind.
The Orange Bowl Parade, Miami's gift to the nation, wholesome entertainment. But in San Francisco, when they take to the streets, it's a parade of homosexuals, men hugging other men, cavorting with little boys.
And that is a much worse stereotype. Save Our Children sparked the first organised backlash to gay rights in the United States, escalating the conflict into a national controversy. Whilst gay rights activists argued that non-discrimination was a matter of human rights, Anita Bryant and co. argued that the non-discrimination ordinance would give special privileges to homosexuals.
As long as they do their job and do not want to come out of the closet and force their homosexuality on me in the areas of business or in the schools, they can live their life, and we're not going out after their jobs and trying to get them out of their teaching jobs or how.
You know, it's that old classic. Gay people have equal rights just as long as they don't do or say anything gay or tell anyone that they are gay. Of course. Anita argued that allowing homosexuals to teach children was tantamount to gay recruiting, because apparently we're a group that can't reproduce biologically, so we have to reproduce by recruiting the children. I don't think she knows about more than one type of queer. She seems confused.
Oh, it's definitely just gay men.
It's the exact same argument that's being used today by right-wing politicians who claim that queer people are groomers. Gay people around the country rallied against Anita Bryant and Save Our Children. There was a national boycott of Florida orange juice, with many gay bars taking screwdrivers off the menu.
And replacing them with an apple juice and vodka cocktail called an Anita Bryant, so you can annoy her into perpetuity by just repeating her name in a gay bar. Have fun with that.
At gay pride marches in 1977 and 78, anti-Anita Bryant slogans featured prominently on t-shirts, signs and buttons, which is where we get the great slogan, "A day without lesbians is like a day without sunshine." Because yes it is. And now you know where that comes from. Also, Anita Bryant sucks oranges, which is probably more specific. But Anita's campaign inspired more anti-gay legislation, including bans on gay people adopting and same-sex marriage, both of which passed in the Florida Senate, as well as the failed Briggs Initiative in California, which would have forced public schools to fire gay teachers. So, awful. But, plus side, activists had a unifying person to hate.
Is that a plus side?
Yes. According to historian Lillian Faderman in her book The Gay Revolution, Anita Bryant created fervent activists out of those who'd previously been content simply to enjoy their newfound freedoms. Faderman cites Eric Hoffman's observation that a mass movement can get along fine without a god, but it won't get along at all without a devil. For gay people all over the country, Anita Bryant became that devil. Gay activists protested her events,
including shutting down the tour for her memoir about how persecuted she was by the awful homosexuals. Boo-hoo-hoo.
Public opinion was turned against Anita Bryant to the point she became unemployable in mainstream entertainment. Oh, so sad.
She was a little too on the nose with her hatred.
Unlike Anita, though, moral panics rarely present themselves as what they are. Instead, they lean into virtue. It's not, we dislike gay people. That sounds cruel. No, it's, we're protecting children. And this matters because people often imagine prejudice as something just cartoonishly obvious, like a villain twirling their moustache whilst actively announcing they hate minorities, which tends to be why bystanders and the general public aren't great at picking up on microaggressions.
I don't know if your boss is actually transphobic. I mean, you were fired when you came out, but he didn't then run you over with his carriage in reverse 5 times.
Can horse-drawn carriages reverse? But historically, that's usually not how discrimination survives. It survives through people convincing themselves they're righteous, sometimes even compassionate. Concern is political branding, especially in Britain. We do love weaponized politeness here.
Oh, I don't hate anyone. I'm just worried. I'm just asking questions. I'm just concerned about safeguarding.
And look, sometimes people are genuinely concerned. Not everyone repeating harmful rhetoric is a supervillain. A lot of people are scared or confused, or a boomer consuming enormous amounts of algorithmically amplified misinformation on Facebook. But intent and impact are not the same thing. And history shows us very clearly that moral panics create real harm. Even room participants believe themselves to be morally justified. Yes, they may be concerned that society as they know it is under threat. Yes, they may believe that traditional values are collapsing, that gender roles are disintegrating, and that the family unit is dying. But that has been said about almost every societal change in modern history.
Are those trousers?
Prejudice rarely exists in neat little isolated boxes. These fears overlap, and they borrow from each other. They evolve together. And one of the clearest examples of that is something called the Lavender Scare.
Families moved to the newly built suburbs, where dads went to work, but moms, for the most part, stayed home.
In recognizing a communist, physical appearance counts for nothing.
Yes, I have made a whole video about this, and you can click this card right up here if you want to watch that. I will also leave a link in the description. But in brief, whilst most people have heard of the Red Scare that took place in the United States of America during the Cold War, fear of communism, political paranoia, accusations, blacklists, fewer people know that alongside it came the Lavender Scare.
Ah, those communist queers. At it again.
Many US officials argued that homosexual employees were vulnerable to blackmail because of the social stigma surrounding same-sex relationships. Oh no, not that the social stigma was the problem. No, just that another country might try to use it. Thousands of suspected gay government employees were investigated, interrogated, and often fired. Not because they committed crimes, but because they were considered morally weak, deviant security risks. The term Lavender Scare comes from a book about the anti-homosexual campaign that was published in the early 2000s, but Lavender Lads was a phrase used repeatedly by Senator Everett Dirks as a synonym for homosexual males. It was also used by Confidential magazine, a periodical known for gossiping about the sexuality of politicians and prominent Hollywood stars. In 1950, homosexuality was far from accepted in American culture, but the general policy in day-to-day lives was that individuals just kept their sexuality to themselves, and the employers didn't ask any questions.
They were roommates.
Amid this kind of indifference? No, that would be too kind. Gay communities flourished in the shadows. From the years of the Second World War to 1950, gay people, men, were employed by the federal government, and Washington, D.C. had become home to a burgeoning gay culture. However, federal indifference to homosexuality was destroyed by the Cold War. A 1950 report by the Senate Appropriations Committee estimated that there were some 5,000 homosexuals in Washington, D.C., 3,750 of whom worked for the government. Republican Senator Kenneth Wherry, author of the report, was worried that communists would use homosexuals to gain their treacherous ends and also propagate more homosexuals around the country.
Yes, all gays can spawn ourselves at will.
His Democratic counterpart, Lister Hill, said that it was an indisputed fact that homosexuals are bad security risks. Almost immediately after Wherry and Hill's reports were issued, 91 members of the State Department were fired for being homosexual. By the end of the year, 600 federal government workers would be fired or forced to resign. In 1952, Dwight D. Eisenhower won the presidential election with his running mate, Senator Richard Nixon, after promising to clean house, committing to remove any undesirables in the federal government. Yet, according to records, the typical detainee was a 25-year-old government clerk. But the consequences extended far beyond lost jobs. These were young men having their lives ruined. Homosexuality was no longer a private matter. No. Now it was a threat to national security. Many people faced public exposure, social ostracism, and long-term barriers to employment. An untold number stepped further and further back into the closet.
Trigger warning. Skip to here.
Even the families of those accused were not immune. After Senator Lester Hunt's son was picked up for soliciting in a park, and his political enemies prepared to drag him across the coals in public to tar Hunt's name, the Wyoming senator shot himself to save his son from the public ridicule. As the bipartisan December 1950 report, led by Democratic Senator Clyde R. Hoey, titled, wait for it, Employment of Homosexuals and Other Sex Perverts in Government, absolutely no bias detected, asserted, persons who engage in such activity are looked upon as outcasts by society generally. Gay people lack the emotional stability of normal persons, and indulge in acts of sex perversion weakens the moral fibre of an individual to a degree that he is not suitable for the position of responsibility. The logic was essentially, if someone is queer, they must be psychologically unstable, and therefore cannot be trusted. ever, at all, for anything. Which, as a disabled person who loves to research our past, that sounds deeply familiar to me. Because disabled people have historically also been framed as irrational, emotionally unreliable, morally suspect, and incapable of autonomy. In fact, marginalised groups are constantly portrayed as scary threats to society, whilst simultaneously being treated as fragile defects within it.
Which is quite the multitasking achievement, and I am expecting my Deviant Award any day now. No, that says diva, not deviant.
Oh, sorry. Not up on these modern terms.
Well, I'm pretty sure I'm meant to be ancient Greek, so...
Although the Lavender Scare caused immense harm, it also helped to inspire early LGBTQ+ rights activism. Historians now regard the Lavender Scare as a major chapter in both Cold War history and the broader struggle for LGBTQ+ equality in the United States. One thing that is striking about these mass panics in the past is how often queerness is linked specifically to gender nonconformity, not simply who someone loves, but whether they look correct. Because societies become deeply anxious when people stop performing gender in expected ways. And historically, butch lesbians absolutely terrified people. They were often portrayed in the media as predatory, aggressive, dangerous women who were supposedly corrupting femininity itself, the exact type to turn your wife into a lesbian.
Yes, ignore all of those close girl friendships she had. One at a time.
Newspapers described them as threatening, psychologists pathologized them, authorities policed them heavily, and weirdly, people became especially fixated on bathrooms. Again, still, always with the bathrooms.
What's a bathroom?
Oh, right, sorry. No, a large number of my audience are American. Toilet, a lavatory, a lav, a loo, a water closet, a WC, the convenience, the cloakroom, the ladies, the gents, the bog. Bit more British for you.
Oh.
Butch lesbians scared 1950s media, not because they were actually dangerous, obviously, but because they disrupted something society relies on heavily. The illusion that gender is natural, fixed, and immediately recognisable. Because once people realise femininity and masculinity can be performed differently, suddenly the whole system starts looking a bit wobbly. And that makes institutions very nervous. Mid-century lesbian communities, particularly working-class butch femme cultures, were often heavily surveilled and criminalised, with lesbian bars being raided, people arrested, and women losing jobs or housing. Butch lesbians in particular became cultural symbols of social anxiety, portrayed as predators and failed women who were a threat to femininity as they looked to recruit vulnerable young women into lesbianism.
Queer people spend an incredible amount of time recruiting according to Moral Panic.
Is there some kind of shared calendar? No one ever invites me.
But genuinely, this idea that queerness spreads through exposure has haunted queer communities for centuries. And butch lesbians became a particularly visible target because they disrupted visual expectations of womanhood. They couldn't be easily ignored. Author Joan Nestle, who documented lesbian bar culture extensively, described butch lesbians as women who dared to wear their bodies openly. Because for many lesbians, especially working-class lesbians, butch identity wasn't simply aesthetic. It was survival. You'd be harassed less walking down the street. When you look passably male at a glance, you'd attract your own community. You're making clear to those in the know the type of romance you're after.
Oh, I say.
But to wider society, it became evidence of supposed social collapse. One 1960s study pathologizing butch women described masculine lesbians as suffering from, quote, a severe disturbance in gender identification, which is important to remember because medicine has often been used to legitimize social prejudice. Entire systems of discrimination have repeatedly hidden themselves behind the language of science. Watch my previous video on medical trauma for more on that one. A woman choosing masculinity has historically been treated as suspicious. In a way, men adopting femininity are often treated as scandalous because femininity is associated with weakness, whilst masculinity is associated with power. So when women claim aspects of masculinity voluntarily, people panic.
Because the social value becomes obvious.
But women aren't always choosing masculinity, right?
The modern bathroom panic around trans people does not emerge from nowhere. It uncomfortably echoes these much older systems of policing who performs gender well enough, according to outside judgment, to be allowed to exist in public space, particularly public femininity. Oh, but don't be thinking this is just an issue for those of us who cannot hide our queerness. No, the performance of a feminine gender, as you may remember well from such key issues as J.K. Rowling being an unhinged troll again, is policed in a multitude of ways. Butch lesbians were frequently challenged in women's bathrooms long before trans people became today's political obsession. There are countless stories throughout the 20th century of masculine-presenting lesbians being interrogated, removed from public spaces, or accused of being men. Gender policing affects anybody who fails to perform femininity correctly, and the narrow idea of the correct femininity is defined not only along lines of sexuality or gender nonconformity, but also sharply along lines of race. Historically, black women in the United States were frequently accused of being improperly feminine, too loud, too strong, too masculine, too threatening. During the height of the 19th century abolitionist and women's rights movements, hecklers frequently accused the prominent campaigner Sojourner Truth of actually being a man in disguise. They claimed she was too tall and too powerful an orator to be a woman. Had that one before. Born as enslaved Isabella Bonfrey in 1797 in Dutch-speaking Ulster County, New York, she was forced into labour at just 5 years old. As a child, she spoke only Dutch and never received a formal education. Much of what she learnt came through oral storytelling and Bible passages recited aloud. Like many enslaved children, she experienced repeated violence, family separation, and sale. At just 9 years old, she was sold away from her parents for $100, the same price as a flock of sheep. She had between 10 and 12 siblings, all of whom were also sold away, and later, as an enslaved mother herself, she recalled struggling to properly feed her own babies because she was expected to nurse her enslavers' white children first.
That sounds like they thought she was pretty feminine to me.
Must we try child rearing and children together? I really can't be doing with the little darlings.
Her enslaver promised to free her early, then reneged. Faced with the prospect of remaining enslaved despite the promise of freedom, in 1827, a full year before slavery officially ended in New York, she escaped, and shortly afterwards her young son Peter was illegally sold to Southern enslavers in Alabama, a state that had no intention of releasing him at 28, despite laws that should have protected him. Sojourner demanded that local law enforcement intervene. After a year-long legal battle, a judge of the Ulster County Courthouse ruled in her favour, making her the first black woman to sue a white man and win. Which is extraordinary enough on its own, but what's especially relevant to this conversation is how Sojourner's existence fundamentally disrupted white ideas about womanhood. Mainstream thoughts of femininity at the time centered fragile white womanhood, delicate, pure, in need of protection, and Sojourner Truth directly challenged that framework. In 1851, at the Ohio Women's Rights Convention, she delivered what became one of the most famous speeches in American history, Ain't I a Woman?
That man over there says that women need to be helped into carriages and lifted over ditches and to have the best place everywhere. Nobody ever helps me into carriages or over mud puddles or gives me any best place. And ain't I a woman?
What made the speech so powerful was that she directly called out the unspoken truth, that society claimed women needed protection, whilst denying black women even basic humanity. She dismantled the notion that womanhood was synonymous with fragility and privilege, whilst challenging the exclusion of black women from the women's rights movements. And this is exactly why discussions around gender policing cannot be separated from race, because historically, black women were often denied femininity altogether. And once you understand that history, modern bathroom panics start looking very different. Because these arguments have never only been about safety, they have consistently been about defining who counts as a real woman and who gets protected and who gets treated as suspicious in public space. And perhaps most painfully of all, many of the same people claiming to protect womanhood throughout history have actively excluded the women most vulnerable to violence. Black women, disabled women, poor women, queer women, masculine women, trans women. The category of woman keeps shrinking whenever fear becomes politically useful, and Sojourner Truth understood that more than 170 years ago. Her speech is now often recognised as one of the earliest articulations of what we would later call intersectional feminism, the understanding that systems of oppression overlap, that you cannot meaningfully fight sexism whilst ignoring racism, or fight for some women whilst excluding others. Because liberation that only protects the most privileged people isn't liberation at all. Which brings us to...
Oh goody, the vote's been expanded. Oh, not for me.
Because if you travel backwards through history, you will discover that society has repeatedly framed equality itself as an existential danger. Women voting?
Catastrophic.
Women working?
Civilizational collapse.
Divorce?
The end of the family unit.
Every major expansion of rights has been accompanied by people insisting the social order is about to disintegrate, and the language becomes almost comical when you line it all up together. Votes for women will destroy the home. Working women threaten morality. Divorce will ruin civilization. Doesn't that sound absurd now? Just think about what our grandchildren will say of anti-trans rhetoric. At the time, those fears were also treated as deeply serious political concerns because moral panics are rarely about facts. They're about perceived instability.
And one of the most destabilizing things for any hierarchy is the idea that its rules are not natural at all.
The campaign for women to vote was met with enormous resistance throughout Britain and the United States. Not simply because people disliked women, but because opponents genuinely argued that political participation would destroy femininity itself. Anti-suffrage propaganda constantly portrayed politically engaged women as masculine, neglectful, hysterical, or sexually undesirable. Women who wanted rights were depicted as abandoning their children, emasculating their husbands, and destabilizing the home. Sounds familiar. Historian Martha Business wrote that anxiety surrounding suffrage often reflected fears that traditional distinctions between masculine and feminine spheres would collapse. The same thing happened when women entered the workforce in larger numbers during and after the World Wars. Women working outside of the home was frequently portrayed not merely as economically disruptive, but as morally dangerous. One commentator in the early 20th century even warned that employment would create a race of women unfit for motherhood, which is genuinely impressive levels of drama, considering they were mostly filing paperwork and doing tedious things on factory lines, but sure. But beneath all of this rhetoric was the deeper fear. What happens if women actually gain independence? Because financial, social, and legal dependence maintain the hierarchy. And when women gained more autonomy, many institutions responded with panic. Sociologist Ali Hochschild later described this tension as part of what she called the stalled revolution, where expectations surrounding women changed faster than social systems themselves. And perhaps nowhere is this clearer than the historical panic surrounding divorce.
Gasp!
Gasp.
Modern conversations often treat divorce as ordinary, stressful, sure, and generally painful. But think of how many divorced people you know. Unless you're watching this from India, Sri Lanka, Vietnam, or Guatemala, the answer is probably a lot.
Shout out in the worst way to the Vatican City and the Philippines for not having any form of legal divorce. Boo.
Again, historically, the legalization and expansion of divorce rights was treated by many people as a societal catastrophe. Critics claimed divorce would destroy children, undermine morality, collapse marriage, and encourage selfishness. Women's selfishness, obviously they didn't mind what the men were up to. Historian Stephanie Kuntz notes that nostalgia surrounding the so-called traditional family often ignores how restrictive and unequal many of those systems actually were. Because for much of history, women remained in marriages, not necessarily because they were happy, but because they lacked legal, financial, or social alternatives. When equality expands, panic follows. Not because society is actually collapsing, but because existing power structures feel threatened. And importantly, these fears are almost always framed as concern for the woman, for her children, for society itself.
Well, yes, we want to preserve the hierarchy is a little go.
And the bodies most heavily scrutinised are usually the bodies already considered out of place. It's those aforementioned black women, disabled women, masculine women, fat women, queer women, trans women. Oh my goodness. The current anti-trans panic is not uniquely rational or unprecedented. It is prodded and provoked by the rage-bait economics of algorithmic outrage, yes.
You want me to what? Debate? If people have the right to exist? Is that not just the human right? Why is this old crone still talking at me?
Treating people at the centre of a revolution as discourse rather than human is sadly nothing new. And you know what? We got over it. Being divorced is no longer something that will make a politician unelectable. Does anyone even know how many children Boris Johnson has? Does he? Is it every baby with the sticky up hair? Because that's a lot. The online TERF aesthetic that wraps itself in pseudo-feminist branding is no different than the protect daughters rhetoric of conservative femininity or the just asking questions assholes.
Even if they do think they're special.
People often discuss anti-trans rhetoric as though it appeared completely independently from all other forms of discrimination, but it didn't. The policing of gender has always been tangled up with racism, disability, misogyny, and class. These systems reinforce each other, because once a society decides there is a correct way to be a woman, suddenly everyone becomes vulnerable to scrutiny. We have been told repeatedly throughout history that expanding rights will destroy society. Women voting destroy society? Did women working destroy society? Did gay marriage destroy society? I'm waiting. 10 years this year. Thank you for asking. Yeah. Our society seems to keep surviving equality remarkably well. And even though it doesn't feel like it when you're in the middle of the current panic, we do tend to come out of the other side a slightly kinder society in the process.
Until the next panic, anyway.
Again and again, people fought for liberation while being told they were destroying civilization. And again, civilization adapted. So you know what, transphobes? I think we'll be just fine. Queer people have always existed. Trans people have always existed. And society thrives thanks to people from marginalized communities who know to take care of their fellow humans because institutions have always failed them.
The world would be a very sad place without us.
If history tells us anything, it's this. Moral panics and queer community doesn't. Once again, happy Pride Month, and thank you for watching. Let me know your thoughts on everything we have covered in this video, and leave a rainbow emoji so I know you made it to the end. And don't forget to scan the QR code on screen, or head to surfshark.com/Jessica and use code Jessica at checkout to get 4 extra months of today's incredible sponsor, Surfshark VPN, for free, so you have access to far more queer content videos around the world. See you in my next video. Bye-bye.